Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Recovery Talk. So in this week's episode, I want to answer a question that I'm asked a lot. And that is, do I need to believe that full recovery is possible in order to fully recover? Do I need to believe I can actually do it in order to do it? So I want to talk about to what extent faith that change is possible is necessary to actually change, and the potential consequences of not having faith. And how sometimes people can end up in a trap where they are not fully believing in recovery and then are kind of proving themselves right. So let's get into it. So, do you need to believe that you can fully recover in order to fully recover? My answer to that is yes, but also no. I know. How helpful is that, right? Yes and no. So let me explain a little bit why it is a little bit more complex than either just yes or just no. I do not believe that in order to start recovery, you have to fully believe in recovery. I know for myself, when I was in recovery, I didn't really believe it would be truly possible for me to recover, but I still got started. And it was by the process of doing, the process of noticing that, wow, I am actually changing and I am capable of making a change and taking control and accountability for my own life, that I started believing that, oh, maybe this recovery thing, there is something to it. So I think that someone can start recovery without necessarily fully believing in recovery or fully be able to picture themselves as a recovered person. And this is very important for me to get forward because I see so many people not starting recovery because they don't fully believe it's possible. And they think that there will be some magical future moment where they will see the light and suddenly realize that recovery is possible, but they don't feel that way now. So then they don't get started. So remember this, you get ready by doing, not by thinking of doing. You start believing in recovery by doing recovery, not thinking about doing recovery. I know I talk about recovery perfectionism all the time, but it is such a real thing. And it is built on fantasies. And the eating disorder loves recovery perfectionism because it's a perfect way to postpone recovery or to stop recovery once things don't go after plan, which, spoiler alert, it won't go after plan. You are not always going to feel like being in recovery when you are in recovery. You're going to have days or even weeks, even months, where part of you is just like, oh my God, I want to go backwards. I don't think this is possible for me. But you keep going. So please don't sit there and wait for the moment when you have a realization in order to start recovery, because that's probably not going to happen. And the real realization is realizing that that's not going to happen. It is normal to have doubts in recovery. Pretty much everyone I work with will say something along the lines of, I don't know if this is going to be possible for me. And they often think that everyone else is super confident and it's like, I'm going to do this, I have no doubts, I have no fears. It's not true. And I always tell people, well, even if you don't necessarily 100% believe it's possible or that you can do it, why not act as if? Why not act as if it is possible, as if you can do it? And that's how you prove the eating disorder wrong, because the eating disorder is going to tell you it's not really possible. And it is saying this to hold you back and to prevent recovery. And this is where a very sketchy situation tends to emerge, right? And that is when someone doesn't really believe full recovery is possible, but instead of just saying, well, screw it, I feel the doubt, but I'm going to do it anyways, they hold themselves back. Because they're thinking, well, full recovery is not even possible for me. Who am I even kidding? So why even try? And this is a type of mindset that often keeps people not just stuck from starting recovery to begin with, but keep people stuck in quasi-recovery. So someone may think, for example, well, I'm always going to have a bad relationship with exercise. So why bother taking a break from the gym? Because there's no point. I'm going to have an issue anyways. Why bother trying? Or I'm always going to have an unhealthy relationship with food, so who am I kidding? Why try and challenge fear foods? There's no point anyways. I'm just going to feel anxious and then it's not going to mean anything. And this is a perfect example of a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is an expression that goes something along the lines of, believe you can or believe you can't. You are right either way. Think about that for a sec. Believe you can or believe you can't, you are right either way. If you believe you can't and you act as if you can't, you're going to prove yourself right because you're not going to do it. You're not going to get there. Recovery cannot happen when you still are just doing eating disorder behavior after eating disorder behavior. It's just not possible. Recovery doesn't build itself. It would be like some builder standing in front of like a building plot and then just staring and wondering, why isn't the house being built? And it's like, you guys have to build the house. Or maybe they put on like a few bricks, or maybe they build a little bit one day, and then they're like, why isn't the house built? And it's like, you have to keep building every day, brick by brick. You can't just do it once, or do it now and then wonder, why is there not any house, right? You can't just put up a few bricks and then tear them down, and then put them back up and tear them down, and then wonder, wow, what's going on with my house? Why is there no house? Because when you start building it, you tear it back down, right? And please don't get me wrong, recovery will have its ups and downs. Recovery will have bad moments and good moments. But the whole thing is, are you able to come back from those bad moments and rebuild? Are you able to learn from those bad moments? In the same way, maybe a builder is building and then makes a little bit of a mistake and something falls down. Maybe they can take that as a moment to learn and think, oh, when I build it that way, that doesn't really work. Or, oh, this is a vulnerability in the foundation. Now I know. So see losses as lessons. But remember, if you are in a hole, stop digging. Don't just keep digging yourself further and further down and wonder, why am I still in the hole? You have to get yourself back up. And I see this over and over and over with people who have done some recovery work, but they're still holding themselves back because they don't know if it is fully possible, and therefore, what is the point of doing recovery stuff? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And people can spend their whole lives like that. And unfortunately, a lot of people with eating disorders do. And I think this is due to the fact that a lot of people have explicitly been told that recovery is not actually possible, either in general or for themselves. In general, I see a lot of narratives around, and you probably heard me talking about this quite a few times before, around an eating disorder is always going to be there, right? It's always going to be there, lingering in the background. And like I've said quite a few times, the vulnerability is probably always going to be there. You're probably always going to be someone who have to be a bit mindful of not going on a diet. But the thing is that with recovery, that is not going to be a big loss. Like, I'm not sitting there now thinking, oh my God, I'm so sad that I can't diet again in my life. I'm like, that's awesome. I'm so glad that I come to a point in my life where that's not something I want to engage in. Because looking at diet culture, it all is just a big hoax and money waste. I'm so glad that I can instead build a relationship with things like movement without it being impacted by diet culture. But unfortunately, the narratives often are, even sometimes within eating disorder treatment, that the thoughts and urges are never going to go away. It's always going to be there, but you just learn how to live with them. And that's just not true, at least not for everyone. But I think the fear of that being true often holds people back and then make them not behave fully recovery oriented. And of course, that confirms that they're right, because then they will always have the thoughts there and will always have the urges there. And I know it can be really frustrating not being able to predict the future, not being able to know how is it going to feel like to be recovered? How much am I going to think about food, body movement when I am recovered? But recovery is about accepting that uncertainty and taking a bit of a chance. Still being like, you know what? I'm going to do recovery actions regardless. I'm going to fight, and I'm going to, whatever outcome is, it's going to be worth it. Because even if 100,000% recovery isn't realistic for you, you surely are going to be in a much better place if you are putting in the work in recovery. And it's much better to be at 90% rather than 50% or 70%. But that is not what your eating disorder is going to tell you. Your eating disorder is going to try and co-opt recovery, and it's going to tell you recovery is only worth it if you are 100,000% recovered and never have a bad day or never have a bad thought. And you may wonder, well, why is my eating disorder telling me that, right? And once your eating disorder is telling you, that's already a sign that something is wrong. Eating disorder is telling you that because then it sets the bar so high that you have a higher chance of failing. It sets the expectation so high that it can very quickly try and lure you back. And it will often set this with the time limit where someone may start recovery and then a few weeks in, they're like, why am I not fully recovered yet? Of course, the really ironic thing is that the eating disorder will also want to hold back from full recovery, right? So on one hand, it will tell you recovery is only worth it if you can 1000% recover, never have a thought, never have a feeling. If not, you may as well just stay with me. But then simultaneously, once you start acting in the way that will give you the best chance of getting to that 100,000% recovered stage, the eating disorder starts acting up and says like, no, this is not normal. You should still hold on to a little bit of eating disorder behaviors, a little bit of eating disorder actions. You can't win with the eating disorder. The eating disorder is always going to take the position that allows the most eating disorder interference. So once your eating disorder suddenly starts saying recovery things, that's when you should get suspicious. So when you get this thing of, I need to do recovery perfectly, I can't make a mistake, everything needs to be perfect, get suspicious, right? It probably is your eating disorder saying these things rather than your healthy self, because your healthy self allows for compassion, it allows to fall back and get back up, and it allows for things not to always be so perfect and predictable. Remember, perfectionism is procrastination. So even if you do have doubts, even if recovery just feels like a really lofty goal right now, still act as if it actually was possible. If you, for some reason, could predict the future and know that it was 1000% possible for you, how would that change how you behave now? If you were guaranteed the outcome, then act as if, because that is what gives you the best chance of do as well as you absolutely can and get the closest to that goal of full recovery as you can. The more you go against your eating disorder and the longer you do that, the more recovered you're going to be. The less you go against your eating disorder, then the less recovered you're going to be. Yes, there may be fluctuations, there may be good days and bad days, as I've mentioned. It's not always 100% what you put in, you get back. Sometimes you put a lot in and then you may get it back like far later. It's almost like you're planting seeds and then you're like, why is nothing growing? And then a few months go and then you start noticing it's growing, right? So recovery is not exactly like put in, get back like 100% of the time with a perfect prediction. But to put it very simply, if you're not putting anything into recovery because the fear of full recovery not being possible is holding you back, then you're not going to fully recover. So this may be a little bit controversial, but I do think that it's better to be in a good place, but maybe not fully recovered, rather than to just be with your eating disorder. Of course, I always encourage people to shoot for full recovery, just because that is just like anyone who's gotten to the point of becoming fully recovered, they will say that, yeah, thank God I did that. But getting to a point where you are at least a bit more flexible, a bit more free, is of course going to be better than being with the eating disorder. And maybe getting to that point can help you realize, oh, I am capable of change, and now I can move even further. I, of course, acknowledge that not everyone with an eating disorder will fully recover, but that doesn't mean that I believe there are people where full recovery is not a possibility. And I'm saying this because I've seen a lot of people who have pretty much been given up on by the healthcare system, even often by their family. I've had people where it's come to a point where their family's already been making funeral planning and they managed to turn around. I always say, as long as there's life, there's hope, but it does have to come from within. Yes, sometimes it doesn't come from within and someone just has to be saved and then later on it starts coming from within. I've seen that with a few people who have been, for example, in forced treatment, which of course is a very difficult topic and I have a lot of conflicting emotions around that, but I have seen cases of people who it hasn't come from within. They've been forced into it and then later on something awakens in them and it starts coming from within. I think part what makes this so difficult is that when someone is very acutely malnourished and in the depths of their behavior, the brain is not going to function properly. The brain is just not going to be quite there and be able to make reasonable decisions, at least not around things like food. I think this can be very confusing to people, and this especially goes with anorexia nervosa, where someone can seem so lucid and so self-aware and so reasonable in every arena of their life, except their decisions around food. And this can almost make people think that they're doing better than they actually are. And I remember this myself because during my anorexia, I needed to get special education. So I went to a specialized school that was for youth who struggled with quite severe mental health conditions and couldn't be in normal education. And my thought was, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. I'm so much more quote unquote normal than these other people. I don't have any self-injury scars. I'm not kicking and screaming. I'm able to do my schoolwork at least most of the time. What am I doing here? Not quite realizing that self-induced starvation is mental illness. Refusing food to the point where my life was at risk, that is delusion. It is mental illness. Probably even makes less sense that a lot of people probably who at that school who were simply responding to severe trauma. So in some ways, my behavior probably in some ways made less sense than theirs. And I think this is definitely something that really complicates the whole conversation around to what extent should someone be forced into treatment, to what extent should someone be able to make decisions around their life, even if that is a decision that can harm them, or that probably will harm them and eventually lead to death, at least in the cases of severe eating disorders. And for me personally, I usually won't work with people who are in that stage that I just described, but I am always very upfront to my clients that it has to come from within. You are going to have to be the one putting in work, even if you have ambivalence, which you probably will have, that is normal. You are going to have to want this. I can't want this for you more than you want it for yourself. And I think this is an issue I see sometimes in treatment, and tend to see it a bit more with coaches, where a coach wants their client to recover more than the client wants to recover. I see it slightly less in therapists and dietitians, and I think that's because they have already been trained on how to manage these things, whilst coaches kind of have to learn it on their own unless they have received specific training in this, which I was very lucky to have received training on, but I see a lot of coaches that are not trained in that. And that creates a really unfortunate dynamic. And it may work in the moment, but it's not going to work long term. It's not going to be sustainable. Sustainable recovery has to come from within. That doesn't mean that you're always going to have to really believe that it's possible, but you are going to have to act as if it is possible. And if you want to settle for quasi-recovery, then settle for quasi-recovery. I'm not here to tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your life, but I would encourage you to think, is there more, right? Could I perhaps get further than this? Why do I believe that I can't get further than this? What kind of beliefs have I potentially ingrained, and where did those beliefs come from? Was it something that was said by someone in your family? Was it by a friend? Was it something you picked up in treatment about recovery beyond this point not actually being possible? Or is it more that you just feel like you are fundamentally broken? If so, why? What makes you fundamentally broken? What makes you so unique, so uniquely flawed that other people can do it but not you? Is that kind of mindset actually helping you? And can you see how that mindset is in some ways a little bit narcissistic, because it suggests that there is something so special about you and what you've been through? And please don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about narcissistic personality disorder here. I'm more talking about the trait of narcissism, which is a trait we all have to some degree, or more about the trait of extreme self-centeredness or self-focus, or just thinking you are so different from everyone else and therefore deserve different things than someone else, whether for better or worse. Because yes, saying I'm uniquely flawed, I'm so much worse than everyone, is kind of similar to saying I'm so unique and so much better than everyone, and I deserve so much more than everyone. They're both two sides of the same coin. And as the expression goes, there's a lot of narcissism and self-hatred. And that is because self-hatred is so self-focused. It puts you away from everyone else and makes you seem like you are so much different. And you're not. You are just as worthy as everyone else. Not more, not less. No one is more or less worthy. And yes, you are unique as a person, but your pain is not unique. So many people have felt what you are feeling right now, and they have survived. The whole of humanity is essentially one long history of humans going through really traumatic shit and then getting out of it. And I think that's what's so beautiful about us as human beings, is that we fall down and we get back up. And people who take something bad that happened to them and take it as something to learn from, to grow from, are, in my opinion, the real winners. Instead of the people who take the same thing happening to them, but then make themselves a victim, right? Where instead it is, why me? And then looking at the other people who have made it and thinking, well, they have made it because they haven't experienced the pain that I'm experiencing. And yeah, some may not have experienced the pain that you're experiencing. There absolutely are people who've made it who have just been really lucky in life. But a lot of times what I see is the most successful people that I know of, the people who've really managed to reach their goals. And when I say goals, I'm not necessarily talking about like being on top of their career. I'm talking about things that are important to them, that could just be reaching peace, are often the people who have experienced really difficult things happening to them, really unfair things happening to them. And that has helped them build resilience to get to where they are now. So take your pain and use it for something good. It doesn't have to be something grandiose, because this is sometimes what people think, like, oh yeah, I'll recover, but then I have to become like a world famous recovery advocate. Doesn't have to be that. It can be something as simple as just using that experience to reach your own inner peace. Or becoming a healthy role model for your children or your siblings or someone in your life. Don't underestimate the seemingly small things. They can make a big impact. Life is incredibly unfair, and people handle that in different ways. Some people find that religion offers them an explanation as to why that happens and offers them a reframe. And I think for many people that can be something that is incredibly helpful and empowering. But we have less of that in today's society, and I think unfortunately a lot of people instead just internalize and think that bad things happen to me because I am bad. None of us is going to get out of this life without experiencing some kind of traumatic event. That doesn't make it fair. That doesn't even make it equal. Some people are going to be more traumatized than others, whether because they experience something that is more traumatizing or they have a psychology that makes them a bit more prone to be quite scarred from these things. But you can still move forward, even if you feel like you don't really believe you can. But act as if you can. Act as if recovery is a possibility. That's how it becomes a possibility. Not necessarily from you believing that it is, but from you acting as if it is. That is what matters at the end of the day. So be mindful of how the belief that full recovery is not possible holds you back from full recovery in terms of your action. But don't overanalyze your thoughts and feelings, guys. Like, I see this so many times where people almost play the thought police with themselves. Like, I'm not allowed to think and feel this way. And if I think and feel this way, I'm not doing recovery right. Stop policing your thoughts. Yes, thoughts and feelings can be very interesting little nudges and guidelines that we can learn from. But I see so many people really being quite mean with themselves for having non-recovery aligned thoughts and feelings and urges in recovery and thinking this is evidence that they're not doing recovery right or that recovery is not possible for them. Like, no, you are human. You are in the process of unlearning, and it's not always going to be perfect, and that's okay. So focus on what you can control, which is your actions, instead of focusing what you can't really control in the same way, which is your thoughts and feelings, because they're going to fluctuate, they're going to pop up, they're going to be good one bad day, bad another day. Just allow them to be without latching onto them too much. Allow them to just float by like clouds on the sky. And I think this is the issue, right? Is that when we come to self-focus, when I say self-focus here, I mean constantly being in our own heads and focusing on ourselves. What am I thinking and feeling today? I think that can sometimes reinforce like excessive thought policing. And don't get me wrong, it's important not to suppress your emotions. But I think a lot of people misunderstand what it actually means to feel. They think that feeling is noticing something and then going in their head and making tons of judgments about what they felt and making up stories about what they felt and beating themselves up for what they felt instead of just feeling the feeling and letting it pass through and doing so without judgment, doing so without intellectualizing. Because intellectualizing your feelings is not the same as feeling your feelings. And that is an important differentiation. And remember this, you do not need to see the full staircase to take the first step. And you can't see the full staircase. You don't know what recovery is going to be and feel like and look like for you. And that's okay. Stop trying to overly predict, because that is just feeding into the eating disorder, trying to micromanage your recovery. Instead, just take a leap of faith. Because you already tried the other option. You've tried the eating disorder option and it didn't take you where you want to be. A familiar prison is still a prison. And also try and remember that recovery has pretty good reviews. Very few people, if any, regret full recovery. I don't think I've ever heard someone who is fully recovered say, "Damn, I wish I didn't do this." I heard people who start recovery who maybe experience weight gain and then panic and say, "Oh my God, I wish I hadn't gained weight." Those things are fine. That's okay and normal. But when it comes to full recovery, and the freedom it gets you, the reviews are pretty great. So even though you can't see the full staircase, trust people who have gone to the top of that staircase and tell you that, hey, the view from here is great, come up here. And just keep walking. Keep taking the steps. You don't even have to know if you're ever going to be able to get to the top of that staircase, but you keep taking a step. And then another step, and then maybe you slip and fall a bit, but then you get back on, and then you keep walking. That is how recovery happens. In fact, there is no other way. So ask yourself this: what are the steps that I can take today that takes me closer towards the top of that staircase, even if I can't see it? And do exactly that, step by step. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you did, and if you're enjoying this podcast, please feel free to leave a rating of the podcast and follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever else it is that you are listening to podcasts. And if you want to connect, you can follow me on Instagram at AmalieLee or at letsrecover.co.uk, or head to my website letsrecover.co.uk. See you guys in the next episode.